"Sign this contract, and I'll give you a scholarship," the senator drawled. But the girl with sparks in her eyes pushed the emergency shut-off button instead. The towering glass and steel headquarters of Vance Power and Grid dominated the downtown skyline. It was here, within a gleaming, panoramic ballroom, that the city's elite gathered for the annual Future of Power Summit. Hundreds of financiers, tech magnates, and political power players exchanged greetings over flutes of vintage champagne. Gold watches and diamond cufflinks reflected the intricate light fixtures, and conversation centered exclusively on stock splits and profit margins, a world away from the darkness currently plaguing the city's industrial areas. At the summit's center stood Senator Alistair Vance, the evening's commanding presence. His custom Italian suit, tailored to perfection, made him look less like a politician and more like the living embodiment of untouchable authority. His easy laugh and carefully practiced handshake concealed the legendary power he wielded over energy regulation and the nation's power supply. He was the energy grid personified, centralized, efficient, and ruthlessly profitable. Meanwhile, outside, the air was thick and humid, heavy with the oppressive silence of a massive regional power outage. The absence of light and the lack of air conditioning were a suffocating reminder of the fragility of modern life. That's when she appeared. A small figure, Chloe Hayes, slipped past the security perimeter near a rarely used delivery entrance. A 17-year-old girl with hands stained with grease and copper, wearing a worn hoodie that had seen too many late nights under fluorescent shop lights. Clutching a laptop she'd meticulously built from salvaged parts, a Frankenstein of circuits and casings, she was the walking antithesis of the opulence inside. She hadn't come for the summit. She'd come because the power failure that night was minutes away from shutting down life support at her community's clinic in the Iron Triangle. The girl's name was Chloe, and she was about to teach a senator that the greatest power surge wasn't found in a centralized grid, but in the unstoppable truth of a simple, decentralized formula. The Iron Triangle wasn't a geometric shape, it was a scar. Tucked between the city's bustling financial district and the vast freight rail yards, it was a grid of collapsing warehouses, sputtering transformers, and apartment buildings that had been forgotten by every maintenance crew for the last 3 decades. The air here was a constant metallic haze. To live in the Triangle was to live under the assumption that the power might go out at any moment. But tonight was different. Tonight, the silence wasn't a flicker, it was a blanket. Chloe Hayes sat hunched over her workbench in the basement of her grandmother's house. The single, bare bulb of her maker station, a complex setup of salvaged components, soldering irons, and 3 mismatched monitors, was powered by a sputtering emergency battery. The air was thick with the smell of hot copper and desperation. 5 minutes, Chloe. Her grandmother, Mama Ruth, called down the rickety wooden stairs. Mama Ruth ran the Triangle Wellness Clinic, the only reliable medical facility for 10 blocks. The batteries for the ventilators are dropping fast. We can't cycle them again. Chloe's jaw tightened. She didn't need a countdown. Her scrap laptop, currently running a diagnostic against a server she was remotely pinging from a nearby cell tower, showed the exact drop rate, 1.5% per minute. The power failure had hit the city hard, but it had hit the Triangle first, and Chloe knew why. She didn't just fix things. She understood why they broke. Her laptop screen, a patchwork of code, revealed the ugly truth she'd spent the last month uncovering. The recent mandatory safety upgrade, pushed by Vance Power and Grid, was nothing more than a poorly disguised system bottleneck. Senator Vance had cut maintenance budgets across the older, low-revenue substations like the one feeding the Triangle. He'd done it to boost quarterly profits ahead of a major stock issuance. When a sudden heat wave spiked demand, the overloaded, ancient hardware in the neglected substations failed catastrophically. The system wasn't down because of a storm. It was down because of greed. The emergency generator at the main substation is locked out, Chloe muttered, typing furiously. She was attempting a remote bypass, but Vance's security was high-grade and designed to prevent precisely this kind of unauthorized access. They're prioritizing the downtown grid. They're rerouting all backup power to the financial sector. We're literally the last on the list. The baby, Chloe, Mama Ruth pleaded, her voice cracking slightly. "Mrs. Perez's little boy. He can't breathe without it." That was the line. The difference between a simple blackout and a tragedy. Chloe slammed her fist on the table beside her, knocking over a spool of wire. The remote access was useless. Vance had designed the system to fail up, not down. She stood up, looking at the blinking, red light of the dying battery array. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed to get to a point of access that had an intact, high-bandwidth connection and enough processing power to force her solution onto the network. Not just a patch, a whole new operating system, a decentralized microgrid formula she'd been developing since she was 14. And the only place in the city currently running on full power with state-of-the-art server infrastructure was the Vance Power and Grid headquarters, the site of the annual Future of Power Summit. "I'm going downtown," Chloe announced, grabbing her laptop bag. Mama Ruth met her at the top of the stairs, her face streaked with worry. "Downtown? That's 4 miles and half the city is dark, Chloe. You can't even get a cab, and you'll never get past the security." "I don't need a cab, and I don't need their front door," Chloe said, checking the power levels on her laptop. She pulled on her faded gray hoodie, zipping it up to her chin. The only asset she had was anonymity, and the fact that everyone in that gleaming tower assumed intelligence only came with a degree and a suit. "I know the service tunnels under the old rail lines. I just need 10 minutes in their server room. Enough time to get the formula running." Mama Ruth gripped Chloe's shoulder. "That man, Senator Vance, he will ruin you, Chloe. He plays in the political field, not in a sandbox." Chloe stared out the window at the absolute darkness enveloping the triangle. The only light visible was a faint, frantic glow from the clinic window. "He already ruined us, Mama," Chloe said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a high-voltage current. "Now, I'm going to make him pay the energy bill." With that, she slipped out into the black night, her scrap laptop tucked against her chest, carrying not just a formula, but the hopes of an entire forgotten community. The journey to the Vance Tower, normally a 20-minute drive, was a treacherous, hour-long trek through darkened streets and abandoned industrial zones. But every step only hardened her resolve. She was driven by the knowledge that for people like her, survival wasn't a right. It was a constant, desperate engineering problem. The summit was well underway when Chloe finally reached the skyscraper's perimeter. The lights of the Vance Tower shone like a mocking beacon over the darkened city. Security guards, impeccably dressed and heavily armed, patrolled every entrance. There was no going through the front. Chloe found the access point she was looking for, a massive, abandoned sewer grate near the adjacent construction site, leading to the underground utility conduits that fed the skyscraper. It was a filthy, cramped, and dangerous route, but it bypassed every metal detector and glass door. She pulled the heavy grate open just enough to slide through, her heart pounding a rhythm against her ribs that matched the frantic, dying pulse of the clinic's ventilator batteries miles away. She was in. Chloe has risked everything and is now deep behind enemy lines. Do you think Senator Vance will honor any agreement he makes with the street hacker? Or is he setting a trap? Let me know in the comments. What is the first thing Senator Vance will do when Chloe interrupts his keynote speech? The grand ballroom of the Vance Power and Grid headquarters was a fortress of self-congratulation. It was 300 feet above the street, insulated from the city's problems by triple-pane glass and an absolute firewall of privilege. Inside, the annual Future of Power Summit was in full swing, celebrating profits and planned expansion, utterly oblivious to the massive power outage crippling the neighborhoods below. The air conditioning hummed, perfectly regulated. Waiters, moving with practiced silence, circulated with silver trays bearing delicate appetizers and flutes of high-end champagne. A single, enormous crystal chandelier, a replica of the world's first central power dynamo, dazzled the guests, ensuring no one had to experience the anxiety of darkness. Senator Alistair Vance stood near the main stage, basking in the glow. He was a man accustomed to applause. His tailored Italian suit was midnight blue, making him look presidential, yet approachable, a necessary combination for a man who managed to profit both from public contracts and private deregulation. He was currently holding court with a handful of journalists and potential investors. The recent service interruption, he dismissed with a wave of his hand, was merely a temporary hiccup caused by unforeseen weather patterns. It simply highlights the need for modernized, centralized control, which, naturally, requires further public investment. He never mentioned that the unforeseen weather pattern was a typical summer heat spike, and that his centralized control system had failed due to years of deliberate neglect in the lower-income districts. To Alistair Vance, the triangle was not a community. It was a line item in an obsolete budget spreadsheet. "And your opponent, Senator?" a reporter asked, referring to a rival political candidate who had been vocal about corporate negligence. Vance chuckled, a practiced, confident sound that bordered on a sneer. "My only opponents are inefficiency and archaic infrastructure. As for the rest, well, they're playing checkers while Vance Power Grid is playing global finance. My job is to protect our investors, and I do it better than anyone." His personal philosophy was simple. Power is a zero-sum game. If he was up, someone else had to be down, and he liked being way up. Across the room, nursing a glass of mineral water, stood Dr. Aaron Bell. He looked uncomfortable in his slightly rumpled blazer, the only man in the room who appeared genuinely concerned. Aaron was a former chief systems engineer for Vance Power Grid, fired 6 months prior for refusing to sign off on the very budget cuts that had led to the current catastrophe. He watched Vance's performance with a sick feeling. Aaron understood the grid better than anyone, and he knew that Vance's hiccup was a lie. The whole regional outage was a controlled bleed-out, designed to pressure the city council into approving Vance's massive, taxpayer-funded modernization package. How many minutes until the clinic shuts down? Aaron wondered. He had tried to leak the diagnostic reports, but Vance's legal team had strangled his attempts with NDAs and threats. He was powerless. He was a man of integrity trapped by contracts. He hated this room. He hated the way everyone treated the air conditioning and the champagne as natural rights, while miles away, people were dying for lack of a simple kilowatt. Just as he was about to leave, unable to stomach any more corporate hypocrisy, his phone buzzed. It was an anonymous ping, an unauthorized access attempt detected on a low-level service ducked near the construction site. It was likely just a disgruntled worker, but the system logs showed a highly sophisticated intrusion signature, something that suggested detailed knowledge of Vance's obsolete conduit map. Aaron paused, staring at the message. The signature was messy, unconventional, almost elegant in its scrappiness. It didn't belong to any known hacking collective. A ghost, he thought. No, something wilder than a ghost. He looked up at the stage. Senator Vance was preparing to take the podium for his keynote speech, bathed in the blinding light of the dynamo chandelier. The time for a distraction, for an intervention, was now. Aaron slipped his phone into his pocket, his curiosity overriding his caution. He decided to stay, a silent spectator waiting for the invisible disruption he now sensed was imminent. Meanwhile, in the stifling, narrow service tunnels beneath the ballroom, Chloe Hayes was navigating a maze of heavy conduits and exposed pipework. The air was hot, wet, and smelled of ozone. Her heart hammered with a frantic energy that threatened to overwhelm her. She emerged into a maintenance shaft just below the main server hub, the forbidden space. This was where the central nervous system of Vance Power Grid resided. Her hands, normally steady, were slick with sweat. She had less than 2 minutes before the clinic's final battery reserve would be exhausted. She didn't have time for elegance. She needed brute force and speed. Chloe took a deep breath, the metallic smell clearing her head. She pulled a scrap laptop from her bag. It was the key, the weapon. She had wired a specialized, high-gain antenna directly into the USB port, bypass NG, the standard operating system. This thing wasn't for browsing the internet. It was for injecting code directly into the network core. She located the main ventilation conduit leading directly into the server room. The hatch was heavy and sealed with a simple security bolt she'd anticipated. A quick, precise application of her salvage multi-tool, tiny, customized piece of engineering perfection, and the bolt clicked open. A burst of frigid, recycled air from the server room rushed into the hot tunnel, bringing with it the faint, rhythmic whirring of thousands of high-speed hard drives, the sound of all that concentrated, untouchable power. Chloe took one last look at her laptop screen. Vance Power Grid main network, access point located. She gripped the laptop, slid the hatch open just enough to crawl through, and tumbled soundlessly onto the polished, chilled floor of the Vance server hub, ready to deploy the formula of fire. The server room was immaculate, a chilled, silent cathedral of computation. Rows upon rows of blinking, humming racks formed a metallic canyon. Chloe quickly crossed the floor, ignoring the red security lights now beginning to cycle with urgency, triggered by the open hatch. She had seconds before the alarm escalated from a silent internal alert to a full, blaring siren. She found the access panel for the main optical trunk, the central highway for all data entering and leaving the building. It was protected by a biometric scanner and a 6-digit key code. Chloe didn't bother trying to brute force the digital locks. She had a better, faster way. Pulling out a complex cluster of wires and a custom-molded port adapter from her bag, a piece of hardware she called the hot wire key. She bypassed the security entirely. She inserted the adapter directly into the diagnostic port beside the biometric scanner and plugged her scrap laptop into it. This connected her device directly to the physical layer of the network, bypassing all software firewalls. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The formula of fire wasn't just code. It was a full, independent operating system designed to run on a decentralized architecture. Her goal wasn't to hack and steal. It was to inject. She brought up the clock on the corner of her screen. T-minus 45 seconds until the clinic's ventilators switched off completely. "Send payload," she whispered, slamming the enter key. Upstairs, Senator Alistair Vance stood at the podium. He adjusted the microphone. A practiced smile plastered across his face. The audience hushed expectantly. "Good evening, and welcome to the future of power," Vance began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating profits. We are celebrating the absolute security of the Vance grid." Just as he delivered the last line, the massive, state-of-the-art projection screen behind him, the one intended to display his keynote slides, flickered. The Vance Power Grid logo dissolved into a chaotic, mesmerizing visual, a rapidly spinning graphic of an overloaded substation, pulses of red light radiating outward, superimposed over a detailed, interactive map of the city. The audio system momentarily cut out, then spat a loud, high-pitched screech before stabilizing. The screech, however, was immediately followed by a flat, computerized voice overriding the ballroom's sound system. "Warning. System critical. Substation Alpha 7, Iron Triangle. Critical failure imminent. Primary cause, deliberate maintenance neglect. Estimated human risk, high." A ripple of confusion, then horror, ran through the room. This was not the senator's presentation. Vance froze at the podium, his practiced smile evaporating, replaced by a mask of pure, white-hot fury. "What in God's name is this?" he roared into the dead microphone. The projection screen zoomed in on a live video feed, a grainy, static-laced image that captured Chloe's frantic work in the server room. The laptop she was working on now had an overlay displaying the detailed, incriminating diagnostics, internal memos, and maintenance orders, all showing Senator Vance's approved cuts, complete with time stamps and digital signatures. The automated voice continued, cold and relentless. Introducing the formula of fire, a decentralized, open-source microgrid solution. Initiating emergency counter-protocol on isolated networks. Priority target, life support at Triangle Wellness Clinic. Time remaining to successful deployment, 30 seconds. The crowd erupted in noise. Investors grabbed their phones, reporters frantically dictated notes, and security personnel surged toward the main screen. Utterly bewildered, Dr. Aaron Bell, standing near the back, watched the chaos with a mixture of shock and awe. "It's brilliant," he breathed, recognizing the complexity of the hack. She didn't breach the firewalls, she bypassed them. She's running her OS directly on their backbone. Senator Vance, realizing he was being publicly dissected by a phantom hacker live in front of the nation's financial press, was momentarily paralyzed by the humiliation. His chief of security, a man named Henderson, rushed the stage, yelling into his headset, "Find the source. Shut it down. Now." In the server room, Chloe heard the rising clamor filtering through the vent. She ignored it, focused entirely on the code compiling on her screen. T-minus 10 seconds. On the screen, a new graphic appeared, a simple, pulsing green line labeled Formula Fire Payload. It was racing toward a red line, representing the failing clinic batteries. Suddenly, the screen flickered again. Vance's IT security had finally located her point of entry and was attempting to crash the local network. A massive denied message flashed across her screen. "No, you don't," Chloe muttered. She quickly typed in a series of commands, rerouting the connection through a deep, encrypted maintenance channel she had discovered weeks ago. The Formula of Fire deployment resumed, but she knew she couldn't last. They were now actively tracking her physical location. T-minus 3 seconds. On the ballroom screen, the green line touched the red line. The computerized voice announced, "Deployment success. Formula of Fire operational. Triangle Wellness Clinic. Life support stabilized." A collective gasp went through the room. The crisis was averted, but the corporate crisis for Vance Power and Grid had just begun. Chloe ripped the hot wire key from the port. Her mission was accomplished, but before she could make her escape, the heavy, steel door to the server room burst open. 3 heavily armored Vance security personnel, led by Chief Henderson, stormed in. Hands in the air, Henderson barked, weapons trained on the small girl holding a beat-up laptop. "You're under arrest for corporate espionage." Chloe slowly raised her hands, but her eyes weren't on the guards. They were on the laptop, which was still running. She had one last message to send. She gave a single, firm tap on the keyboard. The sheer weight of the security officers was immediately upon Chloe. They wrenched her arms back, slamming her against the cold server rack. Chief Henderson snatched the scrap laptop, treating it like a toxic device. "You have no idea what you've done, kid," Henderson snarled, his face inches from hers. "You've interfered with federal infrastructure. That's a minimum of 20 years. As they dragged Chloe, still struggling, toward the door, her final message, the single tap she'd managed before capture, hit the main ballroom screens. The animated diagnostic map of the city's power grid, which had just turned a hopeful green over the iron triangle, was suddenly overwritten by one word, flashing in massive, bold, unforgiving white font against a stark red background. "Fire." Beneath it, a chilling, short sentence scrolled. "Vance cuts. The truth is decentralized." The image vanished as the security team finally managed to kill the server connection. But the message had landed. In the grand ballroom, Senator Alistair Vance stood alone at the podium, bathed in the silent, mocking light of the crystal chandelier. His face was no longer just furious. It was a roadmap of public humiliation. His control, the very foundation of his empire, had been exposed as a fragile, greedy illusion by a teenager with the homemade computer. The press descended, not on him, but on the now empty stage, scrambling to photograph the screens that had displayed his corporate malfeasance. Vance watched as his chief of security, Henderson, dragged the defiant, grease-stained girl through the back entrance. He felt a moment of pure, blinding rage. He hadn't just been hacked. He had been outsmarted and moralized in front of his investors. He instantly shifted from a panic victim to a calculated predator. He had to regain control of the narrative immediately. Vance straightened his suit, took a deep breath, and grabbed a working microphone. His voice, practiced and authoritative, boomed across the shocked silence of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. Let's address this unfortunate incident." He forced a condescending smile. "What you have just witnessed is precisely the dangerous, unchecked, and amateur nature of decentralized technology. A bright young person, clearly misguided, using a homemade machine to commit a blatant act of corporate terrorism, all to push a reckless, unproven agenda." He paused for effect, letting the word terrorism sink in. But I am a man of the people, Vance continued, pivoting sharply. I see not a criminal, but a raw intellect wasted on the streets. I see potential. He then looked directly into the camera lenses aimed at him, adopting the posture of a benevolent savior. I am withdrawing all charges against this young woman, Vance declared grandly, because I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in giving talent a chance. And in that spirit, I am offering this young woman, Chloe Hayes, the opportunity of a lifetime. He picked up a sleek, black contract folder from his podium. This was the humiliation trap, not jail, but forced integration into his system. I am offering Miss Hayes a full 4-year scholarship to the finest engineering school of her choosing, $50,000 for her family's immediate expenses, and a guaranteed, paid position in the Vance Power and Grid apprenticeship program. His eyes narrowed as he addressed the camera, sending a clear, cold message to Chloe, wherever she was being held. All she has to do is sign this document, which is a standard non-disclosure agreement, and, of course, agree to immediately and permanently shut down her dangerous formula of fire before it compromises the safety of the real, functioning grid. The crowd murmured approval. It was a brilliant, cynical move. Vance had just converted a devastating public failure into a viral story about his generosity and silenced his most dangerous critic with a bribe disguised as a future. He had won the narrative. Chloe was being held in a stark, soundproof interrogation room on the ground floor. 2 security guards stood by the door. Chief Henderson stood over her, tapping the scholarship contract with a pen. Hear that, kid? Vance is giving you an out. You get cash, a degree, and you don't spend your 20s in a federal prison. All you have to do is sign the NDA. You walk away with everything. Chloe sat silently, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes sharp and clear. She wasn't fooled. This wasn't generosity. It was forced assimilation. Vance wasn't buying her silence. He was buying her talent and locking it away. Her formula of fire was open source. It was meant to empower communities, not line the pockets of a monopoly. It's a gift, Hayes, Henderson pressed. Take it. What about the people in the triangle? Chloe asked, her voice quiet. What about the maintenance cuts that caused the blackout? Does signing this contract fix the grid for good, or just for 48 hours? Henderson scoffed. That's above your pay grade, kid. That's politics. You got your 48 hours. The clinic is safe. Now take the money and stay out of politics. Chloe looked down at the contract, a sleek, heavy symbol of the corporate world that treated people like commodities and power like a weapon. The pen felt like lead in her hand. This was the moment of truth, the easy path to personal safety, or the impossible path of continued defiance. She picked up the pen. Henderson smirked. Smart girl. But instead of signing, Chloe gripped the edges of the contract folder. She ripped the expensive black paper in half. The sound a sharp, shocking tear in the silence of the room. She looked Henderson straight in the eye. I refuse the scholarship, she stated, her voice trembling slightly, but firming quickly. The problem isn't my education, Chief. The problem is your boss's formula for corruption. She stood up, her small frame radiating immense determination. I didn't come for charity. I came for accountability. Her ejection was definitive, but she had nothing left to wager except the very idea that had saved the clinic. She needed a new, undeniable lever of power. She needed a challenge that Alistair Vance couldn't spin away. Chief Henderson stared at the shredded contract, then back at Chloe. His face, normally impassive, registered genuine disbelief. Are you insane? He hissed. You just threw away a future and bought yourself a federal charge. Vance offered you a golden ticket, and you ripped it up. It was a gag order disguised as a handout, Chloe retorted, her voice regaining its steady power. You think $50,000 erases years of corporate negligence? You think a degree erases the fact that I just had to hack your system to save a child's life? Henderson grabbed her arm, shoving her back into the chair. Fine. Have it your way. We're holding you until the U.S. attorney arrives. But Chloe wasn't done playing on Vance's terms. She needed a microphone, and she knew exactly where to find one. Her scrap laptop, though confiscated, was still broadcasting a low-frequency pulse, a stealthy signal she'd built into the formula of fire. As Henderson turned to signal the guards, Chloe spotted the room's only electronic lifeline, a simple, wired security camera mounted high in the corner, feeding the interrogation room footage to the main security hub. In one fluid, desperate movement, Chloe launched herself up onto the chair. Before the guards could react, she reached up, snapped the camera head off its swivel, and exposed a bundle of fiber optics and copper wire. She quickly connected a tiny, customized microchip she had hidden in the seam of her hoodie sleeve to the copper wires. Henderson bellowed, "What the—" The microchip acted as a low-power, localized repeater, hijacking the building's internal security feed and funneling its output back into the main audio-visual system, the same system she'd just compromised. In the grand ballroom, Senator Alistair Vance was regaining composure, wrapping up his narrative about the misguided child and his generous offer. The press pool was starting to pack up, content with the story of the benevolent billionaire. Then, the screens behind him flared back to life. This time, the image was the stark, unflattering black and white feed of the interrogation room. Chloe, perched precariously on a chair, her face intense, was speaking directly into the damaged camera wires. Her voice, thin but amplified and clear, echoed through the ballroom speakers. "Senator Vance," she commanded, bypassing all filters. "The formula of fire is not a toy, and the triangle is not a line item. I refuse your bribe. I refuse your gag order. I refuse your attempt to buy my silence and bury the truth." The ballroom froze again. Vance whirled around, his mouth agape. "I saved the clinic for 48 hours, Chloe's voice stated, cutting through the murmurs. "But what happens after the emergency batteries die? Your centralized system failed because it's rigged for profit, not people. It's designed to prioritize Wall Street over Main Street." She jumped down from the chair, facing the camera that represented the eyes of the city. "I propose a new wager," she announced, the words resonating with clarity. "A true test of power and integrity, live for the entire city to witness." She paused, letting the silence build, knowing that Vance, with his massive ego and his need for public dominance, was listening. "My formula is running on an emergency network right now. I challenge Vance Power and Grid to a 48-hour open test. We deploy my decentralized microgrid solution to stabilize the Iron Triangle's entire local grid, safely and permanently, while your engineers try to restore the main grid using your current, centralized, profit-first methods. If my formula fails, if my decentralized network causes instability or fails to provide power to the triangle, then I turn myself in. I will accept full federal charges and disappear from the energy world forever." Her eyes were blazing with conviction. "But if I succeed, if the formula of fire stabilizes a full city district where your multi-billion-dollar corporation failed, then you, Senator Alistair Vance, must resign as CEO of Vance Power and Grid. You will sign over your majority shares to a public energy trust, and my formula becomes the mandatory, open-source standard for all future grid upgrades." The demand was audacious, unthinkable. It wasn't a demand for money or a job. It was a demand for systemic change, hitting Vance exactly where it hurt: his power, his ownership, and his reputation. Henderson was screaming into his radio, ordering a complete shutdown of the AV system, but the signal was already broadcast. Vance, however, had the final say. He walked slowly back to the podium, his face dangerously smooth. He looked at the screen, at the small, defiant girl who had just publicly challenged the entire structure of his multi-billion-dollar empire. To refuse would be to admit his system was inferior. To accept was to risk everything. The press corps had abandoned their seats and were now surging forward, screaming questions at Vance. The moment was pure, unadulterated theater, and Vance, the ultimate politician, knew he could not walk away from the camera. Vance leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "A child wants to bet her life against my life's work. An amateur wants to bet a homemade computer against 40 years of corporate science. He let out a harsh, performative laugh. This is not a technical challenge, Miss Hayes. This is an embarrassment. He straightened his tie, the arrogance returning full force. But fine, for the sake of ending this media circus, and to prove to every investor here the utter folly of anarchist, unproven technology. Vance smiled a cold, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. I accept the wager. 48 hours, Miss Hayes. You bet your freedom, and I bet my title. Let's see whose formula burns. The wager is set. Chloe has 48 hours to prove her decentralized, open-source system can succeed where the centralized corporation failed. What is Senator Vance's immediate, covert move to guarantee Chloe's failure? Will he attack her code, her hardware, or her team? Tell me your guess for Vance's first act of sabotage in the comments. Senator Alistair Vance's rage had cooled into a fine, sharp instrument. He didn't see the wager as a fair contest. He saw it as a public execution, and he intended to be the one holding the axe. Immediately after the challenge, he stormed into his war room, a sleek, underground command center beneath the Vance Tower. His chief engineer, a nervous man named Mr. Thompson, and Chief Henderson were already waiting. 48 hours, Vance hissed, pacing the length of the room. 48 hours for that little punk to embarrass me on a national stage. That will not happen. Sir, we've recovered her machine, Thompson stammered. The formula is highly unconventional, decentralized, peer-to-peer microgrid protocol. It bypasses our central servers entirely. It's quite brilliant technically. Vance stopped pacing. I don't care if it's technically brilliant. It is unauthorized. She wants to bet on code. Fine, we'll fight fire with fire. He slammed his hand onto the holographic table. I want Operation Blackout greenlit. Inject the phantom logic worm into every non-Vance node operating within a 3-mile radius of the Iron Triangle. I want every single device that attempts to run her formula of fire to experience cascading failure. We don't crash the grid, we just make her code look unstable. We make her look like a dangerous amateur. Thompson swallowed hard. Sir, the phantom logic worm is classified. It's designed to disrupt foreign infrastructure. It's highly illegal, even for internal use. I hold the power, Thompson, Vance said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am the CEO. I am the senator. I say what is legal and what is necessary. That girl is betting her freedom. I'm betting my empire. Launch the worm now. And Henderson, release her. But put a full surveillance team on her. Let her think she has a chance. Chloe was dropped off just outside the perimeter of the Iron Triangle barely an hour later. The police had been called off, replaced by 2 unmarked black sedans that followed her at a discreet distance. Vance hadn't kept her for legal reasons. He'd kept her just long enough to ensure he had a head start on the sabotage. She didn't run. She walked straight to the heart of the Iron Triangle, a sprawling, defunct power yard that had become the unofficial hub for community maintenance and engineering. The atmosphere was charged with tense hope. The initial formula of fire patch was holding the clinic, but the rest of the triangle was still blacked out. Dozens of faces, familiar from the clinic and the community center, emerged from the shadows. They weren't armed or angry. They were ready to work. Chloe, you're okay. Mama Ruth rushed forward, tears in her eyes, hugging her tight. We saw it all. You told him off. We have 48 hours, Chloe said, pulling away, her eyes focused on the task. He accepted the wager. If we light up the triangle in 2 days, he loses the company. If we fail, I'm gone. We need to set up the main hub here. Get me the schematics for the old, abandoned transformer bank, the one the city marked for demolition. We're running the formula through that. She needed hardware that was physically disconnected from the main Vance network, a truly decentralized starting point. As they began scrambling, pulling out salvaged components, copper wire, and decommissioned capacitors, Chloe's cheap burner phone, a piece of technology Vance's security had overlooked, buzzed. It was an anonymous text message, 3 lines of cryptic, technical code. FLW. Protocol Delta 904 bypass. Look for the ghost in the machine's clock. Reset the timer. Chloe stared at the message. FLW. That was military-grade jargon. Phantom logic worm. How could an anonymous source know about a classified Vance counter-protocol? Then it hit her, Dr. Aaron Bell. The name Aaron Bell had come up in her initial research. The chief systems engineer fired for raising ethical concerns about Vance's budget cuts. He was the only one with both the moral compass and the top-level access to know that jargon. The ghost in the machine's clock pointed to the network's time-sync protocol. The phantom logic worm wasn't designed to destroy her system. It was designed to subtly corrupt the time signature of her decentralized network nodes. If her nodes couldn't agree on the time, they couldn't synchronize power distribution, leading to chaos and instability, making her formula appear fundamentally flawed and dangerous. Vance wasn't hacking her security. He was hacking her reliability. Mama, give me the old, analog quartz clock from the clinic's waiting room. Chloe ordered, her mind racing. And a high-grade Faraday cage. We need to shield the main node physically. Her team looked confused, but they moved. Within the hour, the core of the Formula fire system was being constructed, a highly shielded local network running her custom OS, protected by a simple, old-school, analog clock that would provide an unhackable external time source. It was a bizarre blend of high-tech code and low-tech defense. As she worked, tapping away on her scrap laptop, a realization washed over her. The digital sabotage was a warning. Vance had assumed she'd be working in the digital ether. He hadn't anticipated her having a team, or her using physical infrastructure he'd forgotten about. The digital battle was won before it even began, thanks to her unseen mentor. But the next stage would be physical, brute force, and public. A sudden, jarring sound cut through the focused silence of the yard. The metallic screech of heavy machinery. Outside the perimeter fence, a fleet of bright yellow construction equipment, stamped with the Vance Power and Grid logo, had arrived. They were aiming directly for the abandoned transformer bank, her chosen hub. A man in a hard hat shouted through a megaphone. This area is under mandatory demolition. Vance Power and Grid is clearing this site immediately for a new, centralized substation. Vance was trying to demolish her starting line before she could even begin the race. The appearance of the Vance Power and Grid demolition crew was the switch from digital warfare to physical confrontation. Senator Vance wasn't just attempting sabotage. He was leveraging his corporate and political power to impose his will. Outside the derelict power yard, the foreman, a beefy man with a safety vest and a smug smirk, shouted through a megaphone. This site is now Vance property. Any further work here is trespassing and will be met with full force. The front gate, rusted shut for years, began to buckle under the repeated hydraulic pressure of a bulldozer. Inside the yard, the small team of Iron Triangle residents looked panicked. They had their tools, their conviction, and Chloe's formula, but they had no defense against a multi-ton bulldozer. They'll flatten the transformer bank in minutes. Mama Ruth cried, clutching a fire extinguisher. No, they won't, Chloe said, her voice steady. She wasn't an activist, but she was a problem solver, and the bulldozer was just another machine with an operational weakness. Mama, give me the heaviest chain we have, the one we use to tow the dumpster. And Mark, I need you to run to the old train track behind the yard. I need one of those abandoned rail anchors, heavy cast iron things. Hurry. The men hesitated, but her absolute command of the situation was infectious. They ran. The solution, Chloe knew that Vance's crew wouldn't expect anything complex. They'd expect a human shield, which they could easily remove. She planned a low-tech, high-leverage defensive engineering solution. As the bulldozer prepared for its final push against the gate, Chloe and her team, moving with frantic speed, dragged the massive, oily chain across the dirt. They secured one end to the strongest remaining support strut of the abandoned transformer bank, the anchor for the formula's hub. When Mark returned, breathless, with the heavy, L-shaped rail anchor, Chloe quickly secured the other end of the chain to it. She then positioned the iron anchor exactly 10 feet in front of the gate, directly in the path of the bulldozer. The bulldozer surged forward, ripping the gate off its hinges. But as it drove over the rail anchor, the long, heavy chain went taut. The sheer force of the 20-ton machine, combined with the extreme friction of the anchor digging into the soft earth, brought the bulldozer to an abrupt, screeching halt. The nose of the machine lifted slightly, and the engine strained with a sound of mechanical fury. "What the?" the foreman yelled, jumping out of the cab. Chloe stepped out from behind the transformer bank, holding a wrench like a scepter. "That chain is a high-tensile steel-toe cable," she called out over the grinding engine. "It's rated for 50,000 pounds of resistance. The anchor is perfectly set. You move forward, you snap the cable, and 50,000 pounds of tension snaps your hydraulic piston and likely shatters your engine block." The foreman looked at the straining metal, then back at the small girl. He cursed, realizing he was technologically checkmated by a simple, elegant application of physics and leverage. The demolition was physically blocked. The temporary victory bought them precious time. For the next 36 hours, the Iron Triangle became a fortress of innovation. News crews, drawn by the viral challenge and the spectacle of the chain bulldozer, swarmed the perimeter, capturing images of Chloe and her community working relentlessly. Inside the hub, Dr. Aaron Bell, no longer a silent mentor, was now openly assisting. He had resigned from his consulting firm, unable to stomach the silence anymore. He drove an unmarked white van into the yard, filled with high-grade testing equipment and tools. Vance didn't just authorize the phantom logic worm, Aaron warned Chloe, setting up a complex digital analyzer. He authorized a physical sweep, teams checking every junction box and decommissioned utility trunk for signs of unauthorized installation. They're looking for wires, cables, anything that connects your microgrid to the main grid. Chloe pointed to her setup, the analog clock shielded by the Faraday cage, the scrap laptop, and the heavy copper bus bars leading to the abandoned transformer bank. "We don't need their cables," Chloe explained. "The formula is designed to operate like a series of small, independent batteries, self-regulating and distributing power peer-to-peer across the local circuit. The only physical connection to the old grid is the final output from this transformer bank. It has to look like we just fixed the transformer." They were running on fumes and coffee. The community worked in shifts, guarding the perimeter and running cable lines through old, forgotten storm drains and plumbing conduits, paths that wouldn't appear on any Vance Power and Grid schematic. The digital attack revisited. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Vance launched his final digital offensive. The phantom logic worm, having failed to corrupt the time sink, was reprogrammed to flood Chloe's microgrid nodes with constant, confusing commands. Digital noise designed to make the network incapable of deciding where to send the next pulse of power. On Aaron Bell's monitor, the network activity spiked violently. "He's trying to induce digital gridlock, Chloe. Your nodes are fighting each other for control." "No," Chloe countered, shaking her head, focused intensely on the visual diagnostics. "They're just responding to the noise. The formula of fire has a noise isolation layer. It's designed to treat external, hostile inputs as static." She typed a single command: "Initiate isolation. Route buried conduit 7. Instantly, the frantic activity on Aaron's screen subsided. Chloe's microgrid went silent to the outside world, yet internally, the nodes were still communicating smoothly, routed through the hidden, ancient wiring they had jury-rigged in the plumbing. "It's invisible," Aaron whispered, stunned. "You're using the grid's own dead space as a protected internal channel. Decentralization works because it assumes the center is hostile," Chloe stated, wiping sweat from her brow. "Vance built a network that needed to be trusted. I built one that can survive betrayal." T-minus 2 hours. The core formula was ready to attempt full integration with the Iron Triangle's local circuit. They were aiming for a full city block, powering every house, every business, and ensuring the clinic never had to worry about a failing battery again. The final physical obstacle remained: the main junction box connecting the abandoned transformer bank to the live, local grid wires. It was an intimidating tangle of high-voltage cables, and it required a physical, high-risk connection. I need to tie into the main line, Chloe said, pulling on a pair of heavy rubberized gloves. If I make the connection, the formula takes over the circuit. If I touch the wrong wire, the formula shorts, and the whole thing goes up in flames. I'll do it, Aaron insisted. I'm trained for high voltage. You have a family, Dr. Bell, Chloe replied, looking him straight in the eye. I have a clinic with a baby who needs the lights on. This is my wager. She climbed the ladder toward the main junction box, the air crackling with unchanneled electricity. Meanwhile, Senator Vance, watching the live feed from his war room, saw the ladder. He saw Chloe climbing, his face, already set in a grim mask, lit up with malicious glee. Thompson, physical assets. Vance roared. I want a power spike in substation Beta 3, a localized surge aimed at the Iron Triangle's main line. Not enough to damage their property, just enough to vaporize any unauthorized connection she tries to make. Do it now. Make her fail permanently. Chloe was halfway up the wooden ladder, her rubber-gloved hand reaching for the main junction box. The air was heavy with the smell of ionization. She could feel the faint thrum of the power flowing through the lines, waiting to be tamed or unleashed. In the Vance Power and Grid war room, Senator Alistair Vance watched the live feed with grim satisfaction. Execute phase Delta 9. Vance commanded into the headset. Targeted surge on the Iron Triangle main line. Now, Mr. Thompson, the chief engineer, winced but obeyed, throwing the switch. A low, menacing sound emanated from the control panel, indicating a massive, targeted power spike surging down the line from a distant substation. In the power yard, Dr. Aaron Bell saw the indicators on his high-grade voltage analyzer jump. Chloe, incoming spike. Voltage is spiking past $10,000 volts. It's enough to vaporize the copper. Chloe froze on the ladder. She had only seconds. If she connected the formula now, the spike would overload her circuit, shorting the entire formula of fire and potentially electrocuting her. She needed an immediate, high-resistance distraction on the main line, something to absorb the instantaneous peak of the surge before she made the final splice. She saw Aaron scrambling below, frantically searching his equipment. He didn't have a surge protector powerful enough. Chloe shouted down Aaron. The capacitor bank, the old one from the demolition pile, connected to the nearest ground wire. The capacitor bank was a relic, a massive, cylindrical array of outdated components that Chloe and her team had pulled aside but hadn't integrated into the formula. It was designed to store and release huge amounts of energy, however briefly. Aaron didn't hesitate. He grabbed two massive, heavily insulated cables from his van, bolted one end to the capacitor bank's charging terminal, and connected the other end to the thickest grounding wire he could find near the transformer bank. I need resistance, Aaron yelled, but I can't hold it for long. The surge was now milliseconds away. The air around the junction box began to sizzle audibly. The unconventional distraction. Thinking fast, Aaron ran to the front of his van and grabbed the largest piece of metal he had, the heavy-duty, commercial-grade jackhammer he used for concrete work. He didn't have time to connect the capacitor bank perfectly. It needed an immediate, high-resistance connection to the ground. With a grunt, Aaron plunged the steel bit of the jackhammer directly into the earth beside the grounding wire and pressed the activation switch. The powerful machine roared to life, driving the heavy steel deeper and deeper. The physical, vibrating contact of the jackhammer provided the final, immediate physical resistance and surface area needed to shunt a critical portion of the massive incoming surge into the ground. The capacitor bank instantly absorbed the residual voltage that the jackhammer couldn't ground, causing the antiquated unit to glow with a terrifying blue light. The bank overloaded with a sound like tearing metal, then exploded in a harmless plume of smoke and sparks. The surge was diverted. The immediate path to the junction box was now momentarily safe. Now, Chloe, the spike is gone, Aaron yelled, dropping the now useless jackhammer. Chloe wasted no time. She didn't have another moment of grace. She slammed the formula's specialized, high-resistance contact wire onto the exposed mainline terminal. Click. The connection was made. The scrap laptop monitoring the formula of fire immediately turned from green to a pulsing, deep gold. A notification flashed. Formula of Fire OS 7, successfully integrated into local circuit. Decentralized power initiation commencing. In the Vance war room, Senator Vance's face was ashen. What happened? The surge should have vaporized her. Why is the local circuit stabilizing? Thompson, trembling, pointed at the screen displaying the power flow diagnostics. Sir, the spike registered, but the local power signature didn't even flicker. Some kind of counterimpedance, some giant resistor, diverted the entire surge to the ground. And now the triangle circuit is showing an independent, clean power signature. It's not drawing from the Vance main line. It's running on her system. Vance's head whipped around to the clock on the wall. T-minus 1 minute. The time had expired. Back in the yard, a collective cheer went up. Lights began to flicker on across the entire iron triangle. Not the dull, struggling light of the old grid, but a clean, steady, bright illumination. Sirens and generators across the district fell silent as the power returned. Chloe climbed down the ladder, exhaustion etched into her face, but her eyes shining with triumph. Aaron met her, giving her a relieved hug. "We did it," he murmured. "It's running." But the ultimate victory wasn't just technical, it was political. Suddenly, 2 figures pushed past the small crowd, followed by a phalanx of cameras and federal agents. It was Theodore Blackton, a renowned Silicon Valley philanthropist and a vocal advocate for open-source technology, accompanied by a stern-faced woman in a federal regulator uniform from the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Blackton approached Chloe, offering her a hand. "Miss Hayes, I am Theodore Blackton. I believe you have just successfully demonstrated the superior functionality of a decentralized grid." He then turned to the cameras and the federal agent. The wager was publicly made and publicly won. "Senator Vance, you are due to honor your word." The final command. Senator Vance, forced to appear, walked into the power yard, a scene of chaos and celebration, surrounded by his security detail. He looked out of place, defeated, yet still radiating cold fury. "This is not over, Blackton." Vance spat. "I may have lost the wager, but she's still a minor. She cannot legally take control of a publicly traded corporation." Blackton smiled, a look of calm triumph. He handed the FERC agent a sealed document. "Perhaps you didn't read the fine print of my organization's oversight agreement, Senator. Vance Power and Grid has been operating with federal oversight since your last infrastructure collapse. This document, prepared in advance of this demonstration, establishes a non-revocable legal trust." The FERC agent, looking directly at Vance, read the final verdict. "Pursuant to the terms of the publicly executed challenge, and in light of the demonstrated corporate negligence revealed in the emergency diagnostics, the majority voting shares of Vance Power and Grid are hereby transferred into the Hayes Energy Solutions Trust, with Dr. Aaron Bell designated as the initial trustee and CEO proxy, effective immediately, until Miss Chloe Hayes attains majority. Senator Vance, you are required to step down and vacate your office by midnight." Vance sagged, his meticulously crafted empire crumbling beneath the triumph of a single, well-placed connection. Chloe walked past the defeated senator, not sparing him a glance. Dignity doesn't acknowledge what tried to destroy it. She walked toward the center of the iron triangle, where the lights were now blazing, steady and reliable. The iron triangle was illuminated, not just by power, but by purpose. Senator Alistair Vance, defeated and stripped of his corporate empire, stormed out of the yard, refusing to acknowledge the crowd or the press. He was a non-entity now, his authority evaporated. Chloe Hayes, still just 17, stood amidst the celebration. The roar of the crowd wasn't for her as a person, but for the idea she represented, the powerless taking back control, the symbolic act. The first order of business, as the official CEO proxy of the newly formed Hayes Energy Solutions, HES, Trust, was immediate, symbolic, and deeply personal. "Dr. Bell," Chloe said, turning to Aaron, whose face was alight with pride and relief. The first action of the Hayes Energy Solutions Trust must be to officially dedicate itself to the community it betrayed. She then walked over to the bulldozer, the massive yellow machine still straining against the high-tensile chain she had used to stop the demolition. The chain, a symbol of resistance and ingenious low-tech defense, was now slack. Chloe pulled a large, industrial-grade power cutter from Aaron's van. With the entire press corps and the community watching, she aimed the cutter at the massive, blocky Vance Power and Grid logo plastered on the side of the bulldozer's cab. With a shower of sparks and the screech of grinding metal, she systematically cut the old logo into pieces. When the logo was completely removed, she didn't replace it with Hayes Energy Solutions. Instead, she spray-painted simple, bold stencil onto the now blank metal, triangle first. "This machine," Chloe announced, addressing the cameras and the crowd, her voice strong, "will not move until every street in the iron triangle is running on reliable, decentralized power. It will then be used to rebuild every substation and community center that Vance Power let crumble. We don't need charity. We need reinvestment. And HES is starting here." The crowd erupted in cheers. The message was clear. The company now served the community, not the shareholders. The aftermath and the trust, 3 months later. The transition was chaos, but controlled chaos. Aaron Bell, as the official CEO proxy, handled the corporate and legal firestorm. The legal battle to fully liquidate Vance's minority holdings and fend off lawsuits from furious investors was brutal, but Theodore Blackton's legal collective was relentless. Chloe, meanwhile, focused on the technology. She moved into a small, functional office in the Vance Tower, but spent 80% of her time in the Iron Triangle. She, Aaron, and a rapidly hired team of young, ethical engineers worked on implementing the formula of fire across the entire district. The system worked flawlessly. Because it was decentralized, maintenance was easy. If one block went down, the rest of the network continued unimpeded. Chloe insisted the formula of fire remain open source. Her goal was not to create a new monopoly, but to provide a blueprint for communities worldwide. "Senator Vance tried to erase me, Aaron," Chloe reflected one late night in her new office, looking out at the skyline. "But he forgot that power doesn't come from the top down. It's generated from the ground up." The senator's end. Alistair Vance, stripped of his corporation and his political influence, tried to start a new campaign focusing on unregulated anarchy and the dangers of the open-source movement. But his reputation was toxic. The images of his arrogant smirk contrasted with Chloe's determined, grease-stained face, and the diagnosis of his corporate negligence were too damning. Within 6 months, Vance was facing multiple regulatory fines and was a pariah in the world he once dominated. He was, to all intents and purposes, functionally erased from the power grid. The legacy. 2 years later, the Hayes Energy Solutions Trust officially transferred full control to Chloe on her 19th birthday. The company was unrecognizable. It was leaner, more focused on infrastructure ethics than profit margins. It successfully licensed the formula of fire to dozens of cities and rural areas globally, making energy affordable and accessible where it was once scarce. Chloe Hayes, now 22, walked onto the massive stage of the World Economic Forum, not as an activist, but as the CEO of a revolutionary energy company. She stood before the global elite, the very people who had attended Vance's summit, and they hung on her every word. She was the youngest woman ever to address the forum's opening plenary. "My first lesson in power," Chloe said, her voice confident and resonating, "was taught by a failing battery in a hospital and a billionaire who thought a contract could buy silence. But I learned that a formula is more than just math. It's a statement of value." She smiled, looking over the audience, a sea of suits and titles. "Senator Vance taught me that greed is the most unstable force in the universe, and my formula of fire proved that when you build a system on integrity, decentralization, and community, not entitlement, you create something unstoppable." She paused, concluding her address, bringing the story full circle. "The most important formula I ever designed wasn't for electricity. It was the equation that proved courage plus truth could equal unlimited power. And that was the end of Alistair Vance's reign, and the beginning of Chloe Hayes's. Chloe's story proves that the greatest power isn't about centralized control. It's about the conviction to fight for what is right. What systems in your community need an injection of a formula of fire to shift power from corruption to the people? Is it local government, education, or access to essential resources? Share your thoughts and what Chloe's story inspires you to challenge in the comments.